Hey YouTube, Bob here. Welcome to World of Nintendo. I've got a lot more content like this on the way, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment to let me know what you think. Here we go. Today we have a hardware unboxing for the Nintendo Unboxed playlist, and as you can see it is the Satellaview peripheral for the Super Famicom, released in Japan in the year 1995. Already very well near the end of the Super Famicom's lifespan, although in Japan consoles do tend to have longer lifespans than in other regions like the United States. But when it finally was discontinued in the year 2000, it had heavy competition from Nintendo's own N64, as well as PlayStation and other consoles that were still thriving in Japan. So that's one of the reasons this peripheral wasn't quite as successful as it could have been. The other reason, as you see in the name, Satellaview, was that the content was delivered via satellite broadcast, and that imposed some pretty hefty limitations on when or how you could play the games that utilize the content. And I'm not going to go into much detail here about the types of games that you could play. This is more of an unboxing video. But if you are interested in knowing more about the games, I highly recommend this video by Tetrabit Gaming that I have the link for on the screen now, and I will put a link in the description for this video as well. So definitely check out the video by Tetrabit Gaming if you are more interested in the types of games. But we're going to take a look at the actual hardware and its packaging here. Much like the 64DD, I believe that the Satellaview was available either at retail stores or via mail order. And given that this version of the packaging that I have has this color slip case on it, I believe this is more the retail version. If you got it in mail order, I think you would get the same exact configuration of the product, however you wouldn't get the slipcase. So let's take a look at the slipcase that we got here. Got a nice full color view here of the Satellaview. As you can see, it mounts underneath the Super Famicom, just like the 64DD, and it also uses this interface cartridge, which, much like the Super Game Boy, you put in this little cartridge module, and that is where data is stored. And you could have multiple versions of that to store data for different games. On the side panel here, we've got a yellow color background with an image of the peripheral mounted beneath the Super Famicom. We got the Satellaview logo. On this panel, we've got some more information with the serial number, the actual model number rather, and what appears to be a serial number, but this doesn't seem to match any of the documentation I have, so I'm not exactly sure what that number is all about. On the other long edge here, we've got the same yellow background, images and logos, and then here we have a similar panel with the part information. Copyright 1995 Nintendo. And in addition, Nintendo also worked with a satellite broadcast company called St. Giga. So we're going to see some of that branding throughout the things that we see inside this package. But you can see actually right here, St. Giga, broadcasting via satellite. Hits the satellite and then broadcasts down to the Satellaview. But you did need to have a satellite connection service in your home as well. And there's this whole kind of selector module that you're going to see that's included that helps you make all those connections. These are all the things that are included in there, that selector being one of those things. But the majority, actually all the text here, is in Japanese, except for we do see BS in several different parts here. BS just means broadcast satellite. So that is the slipcover. And if we take it off, slides off just like so, and reveals a cardboard box. Kind of have a logo that's reminiscent of the 4-button controller logo that we see for the Super Famicom. It appears that that is one that they developed for the Satellaview, and then there is the Super Famicom version of it. On this panel we see here that a piece of tape that served as a seal had been removed. And on the back of the box here, it is instructing you to open it at that end. So that is how we will get into it. Welcome to Satellaview world. And then of course here, got a bunch of information in Japanese along with some telephone numbers. I'm assuming that you would call first service. So on the side panel, we didn't get to see with the slip cover. We've just got the Satellaview branding. And then pretty much the same thing on this side as well. So let's open up the box and see what we have. Some more information there. Flip it up and we get another box. If we pull that up, then we start to see what was packaged with the Satellaview. Lots of things in here, including documentation, which is what we'll take a look at first. So the first thing that kind of falls out at you, very small here, these are labels, additional labels for the cartridge modules here. And I'll demonstrate how that works later on, but you can write down what game that you have downloaded onto that cartridge module. Looks like you get 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 extra labels here. And then the other documentation that was included. This is the Bsx Manual here, which I believe is kind of the hub, the menu hub of how to navigate through the various different functions of the Satellaview. And it actually looks like it's modeled using some of the artwork, or artwork inspired by Earthbound, as you'll see as we open this up here. Got a table of contents. Lots of illustrations. Tells you a little bit about that cartridge, the interface cartridge, and then the different modules you could put in there for your downloaded content. And then there, that screenshot is some of the first indications of that Earthbound style of graphics. And then there is the hub world. All those different points of interest are different menu items, and that's kind of how you navigated through the main menu interface of the Bsx on the Satellaview. Got different characters, what the controller buttons did, and then we go into some detail here about the different points of interest on the map or in the menu. This part of the manual here is talking about the cartridge modules and how you could download information to them on the interface cartridge. But yeah, the main piece of interest here is that map. Very interactive menu about how to get around and navigate the Bsx menu here. And then this next piece, it looks like a pamphlet of warnings or just information. You see BS for broadcast satellite all over it here. And then we have two different manuals here. I think this one is the connections manual, and then this one is the usage manual. Let's take a look and see what we have. So yeah, a little illustration there about how the broadcasting works from the satellite. And you can see you needed lots of different components here. You needed your satellite receiver that would hook up into the Selector, which was actually included with this package here. Information on making all the different connections, what the different ports were, the different components that were included. You got the AV selector, power adapter, and then the AC power pass-through, or DC rather. how to use the interface cartridge, making all the connections, AV connections as well from that selector. And it's interesting, this booklet is going into lots of different scenarios that you may have as far as your TV goes, as far as your satellite receiver goes. They had to take into account everybody's unique setup. And I believe that is what this next piece of documentation is for. Making all those connections depending on the type of setup that you had. So if we take a look, this one here, lots of text, bit of a flow chart diagram here. And I think once we get into this, they have illustrations of how to make all of the connections. From your satellite receiver, getting that signal, to your TV, how that interfaces with the AV selector, and ultimately connects to the Satellaview. So yeah, this manual here just takes you through any and every possible setup that a consumer could have and showing them how they would make those connections. And it just keeps going. It looks like they're almost getting down to different types of models of satellite receivers because that image changes. So yeah, basically just how to make those connections. And that's what we're going to see once we get into the box here, that a lot of what's included here are the hardware for making these connections, because the Satellaview peripheral itself is actually very simple. It's mostly plastic. It really just has a pass-through and some LEDs on it as far as the hardware is concerned. So that's the documentation for the Satellaview. Let's take a look at the hardware we get. We'll take a look at the Satellaview itself because I think that's going to be important in understanding what some of the other things are. If we take it out of its baggie here, you can see that once I remove this EXT port, that's really all that's going on in the Satellaview here. And this is an EXT port, very unique connection here. I've never seen that type of connection in any other Nintendo hardware. And I don't know if the intended peripheral that was supposed to go in there was ever released or not. If you have more information on that, do let us know in the comments. But this connector we should recognize because we would see the male end of it on the actual Super Famicom. So let me grab a Super Famicom here, and we will make that connection. Take off the EXT port here, and then there is the male counterpoint here, or counterpart rather, and then all we need to do is stack them together, push down to make the connection, and then there are some thumb screws, very similar to the ones that we would see on the 64DD. So that is how you would make the Satellaview interface with the Super Famicom. And then they would look like that. You've got the access when it's receiving satellite information, much like an early CD-ROM system like the Sega CD would have, and then power to let you know that it was powered on. And in regards to the power, this does have its own power supply, but interestingly, you actually attach the power supply, you attach the power supply to the AV selector here, because you're going to use another piece of hardware to actually pass the DC current from the Satellaview to the Super Famicom. So it's kind of a two-in-one deal. So I'll show you how that would work. You can see kind of this L-shaped piece. and it has two different AC plugs on it. This one is more reminiscent of the one used by the US Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and then this one is more akin to the Famicom and Super Famicom, which is I think how they keyed it so you couldn't put them in the wrong ports there. Plus the text here kind of lets you know how that was supposed to work. So this is the DC in and then DC out on the Satellaview, and you plug that in. So it's getting the power from the AV selector, which I will make that connection as well. Passes through here up into the Super Famicom and then powers both of them. There's also a port here that says BS in. So broadcast satellite in, that is where you would get the information from your satellite receiver. So let's take a look and see how some of that would work as well. But we'll just take a little bit more of a look at the hardware here. I'll separate the two. Something of interest you probably noticed while they were connected is this channel right here, which obviously is a channel for some sort of cord for that mystery peripheral. But if we look in here, you can see this is pretty much just all hollow and empty. It's to have a pass-through for the ventilation on the Super Famicom. So there really isn't a whole lot going on hardware-wise in the Satellaview. It's more of a pass-through, and unlike the 64DD, there's no disk drive in it. So really, it's kind of like a cradle or a stand for the Super Famicom. But most of the magic, so to speak, would happen with this AV selector. That's where the power and the data were passed through, and then they were also the data was also passed through to this interface cartridge, which we'll take a look at now. Up until this point here where my finger is, it looks like a standard Super Famicom cartridge, but then it has this expansion part much like a Super Game Boy, and that of course is to accommodate this memory module here. And there we have that connection that we didn't see too often outside of the Satellaview, I don't think. That is how the module would interface with this cartridge here. And that is where you would store your game data streamed through the satellite. Here is the AV selector. Lots of different labels here. Got the multi-out for AV video. We've got, this is the cable that's actually going to connect to the Satellaview. This is where the data would come in from the satellite. This is the power. And then the power would actually be piped in through here as well from the proprietary AC adapter. So let's take a look at that. It's the last thing in the box here. On one end we've got your standard wall plug, and then the brick with the Satellaview branding on it. And then on the other end here, we have the adapter that is more similar to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, which I think, like I said, they employed that as kind of a keying system so that you couldn't mistake the two. So let's take a look and see how this would all hook up. So again, I'm going to make the connection with the Super Famicom and the Satellaview. Actually tighten the thumb screws this time. And we will do our DC pass-through here, taking the power from the Satellaview and sharing it with the Super Famicom there. And then what you would do is take your AV selector, and on this end of the cables You've got your DC in from the power, and then this RCA style cable here that would pipe in the information from your satellite receiver. And then of course that would interface with the cartridge on here. And the communication would be allowed by the Satellaview itself. And then finally, the other connection you would need to make was connecting this end to your own satellite receiver. And then of course the AC adapter to get the power from the wall. You would use this Super Nintendo style plug and plug it in here to the AV selector. Which turns out is on this side. There we go. So quite a few connections you had to make to get the Satellaview to work. And sadly, since the St. Giga service has long since been shut down, there is of course no way to play these games at the appropriate time when the satellite information would be broadcast. But people have throughout the years saved the information for the games to their interface cartridge modules and have pieced the games back together in emulation ROMs. So if you know where to look on the internet, these games still do exist in some form. And there's some Legend of Zelda games and Mario games and even some sequels to F-Zero. So like I said, if you're interested in hearing more about the actual content on the Satellaview, definitely check out the Tetrabit Gaming video on that topic. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I invite you to stay tuned for more content that I have. Thanks for joining me this time. Take care.